Underneath the marble pillars and the glory of ancient Rome lay a dark, unspoken terror. The Roman Empire was the ultimate superpower of the ancient world. They had conquered kingdoms, crushed rebellions, and turned the Mediterranean into their own private lake. But their worst nightmare didn't come from a foreign king. It didn't come from a rival empire. It came from inside their own walls. It came from a man they had stripped of his humanity, thrown into a cage, and ordered to die for their entertainment. His name was Spartacus. The question is not just how he fought back. The real question, the one that terrified the Roman elite to their very core, is how a single slave exposed the fatal flaw of the greatest military machine on earth. To understand this terror, you have to understand what Rome was built on. Rome wasn't just built on the discipline of its legions, it was built on the backs of millions of enslaved people. They farmed the grain, mined the silver, built the roads, and served the wine. The elite Romans lived in unimaginable luxury because the invisible chains of slavery held the system together. But when you build your entire world on the subjugation of others, you are living on a powder keg. You are entirely surrounded by the enemy. Every Roman senator knew that their wealth, their families, and their very lives depended on the enslaved remaining broken and obedient. In 73 BC, in the city of Capua, a gladiator named Spartacus decided he was done being broken. He didn't start with a grand army or a master plan. He started with 78 men, chopping their way out of a gladiator school, using nothing but meat cleavers and spits from the kitchen. If you were a Roman politician at the time, you didn't take this seriously. To Rome, this wasn't a war, it was a police problem, a nuisance. They sent a praetor with 3,000 hastily gathered militia to trap Spartacus on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. The Romans blocked the only path down. They thought they could just starve the gladiators out. But Spartacus understood something the arrogant Romans did not. He understood survival. He and his men wove ropes out of wild vines, rappelled down the sheer, unguarded cliffside of the volcano, and attacked the Roman camp from behind. They slaughtered the militia and stole their weapons. In that single, brilliant move, the myth of Roman invincibility cracked. Spartacus wasn't just a fighter, he was a tactical genius, and suddenly the powder keg was lit. Rome's nightmare began to multiply. The news of his victory spread like wildfire across the Italian countryside. The slaves working the massive elite estates heard the whispers. They dropped their tools. They killed their masters. They flocked to his banner. What started as 78 desperate gladiators exploded into an army of tens of thousands of men, women, and children. Rome sent another army, Spartacus crushed it. Rome sent both of its consuls, the highest military leaders of the Republic. Spartacus defeated them too. The terror in Rome was absolute. This wasn't a barbarian horde marching from the frontiers. This was an enemy that knew the terrain, knew the Roman tactics, and had nothing to lose. Every wealthy Roman looked at the people pouring their wine and making their beds and realized, the enemy is already inside the house. Spartacus wasn't just winning battles, he was humiliating the system. He took captured Roman officers and forced them to fight to the death as gladiators, making the masters bleed for the entertainment of the enslaved. He flipped the entire social order upside down. For 2 years, he marched his army of the oppressed up and down the Italian peninsula, plundering the estates of the rich and distributing the wealth. He didn't just threaten their armies, he threatened the very concept of Roman power. If slaves could defeat legions, then the entire structure of the Roman world was a lie. If the oppressed realized their own strength, the masters were finished. By 71 BC, the Roman Senate was in full panic mode. The regular rules no longer applied. They turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who used his own vast fortune to raise new, massive legions. Crassus was brutal. He revived the ancient practice of decimation, killing 1 in 10 of his own men if they showed cowardice, just to prove to his soldiers that they should fear him more than they feared Spartacus. Rome threw everything it had at the rebellion, and eventually, the weight of the empire was too much. Spartacus was backed into a corner in southern Italy. He didn't run, he didn't surrender. Before his final battle, he brought his horse to the front of his army and killed it with his sword. He told his men, "If we win, we will have plenty of Roman horses. If we lose, I will not need one." He died on the battlefield, fighting fiercely, trying to reach Crassus himself. Rome's revenge was as horrific as their fear had been. They took 6,000 survivors of the rebel army and crucified them along the Appian Way, the main road leading into Rome. For miles, the agonizing screams of the dying echoed across the countryside. The bodies were left to rot for years. It was a message written in blood. This is what happens when you challenge the order. But the message Rome actually sent was completely different. They didn't prove they were strong, they proved they were terrified. They had to mobilize their entire empire to put down a man who started with a kitchen knife. So what does the story of Spartacus tell us? That power based purely on force is an illusion. When an elite class builds its wealth by completely alienating and crushing the people beneath them, they are never truly safe. The Romans thought their system was permanent. They thought their institutions and their military would protect them forever. But Spartacus proved that the human spirit cannot be crushed permanently. He proved that when people have nothing left to lose, they become the most dangerous force on earth. The elites of ancient Rome learned a lesson that empires and rulers have been forced to relearn time and time again. The dynamics of power haven't changed. We don't have gladiators and legions today, but we still have systems built on vast inequality. We still have elites who believe their wealth and power make them untouchable. They assume compliance is permanent until the day the bottom drops out. Spartacus wasn't a nightmare because he was a monster. He was a nightmare because he held up a mirror to Rome and showed them the monster they had become. History doesn't repeat exactly, but the same fires catch when the wood is dry enough. If you take only one lesson from the story of Rome's greatest rebel, it's this: no empire is too big to blind. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads.